Welcome everyone to the Aquarium of the Pacific. Mi nombre es Marilyn Padilla. Soy la directora de Relaciones Públicas aquí en el Acuario. My name is Marilyn Padilla and I'm the Director of Public Relations here at the Aquarium. Hoy es una noche muy especial donde vamos a escuchar las historias de Andrés Pruna. Today is a very special evening where we will be hearing the wonderful stories of Andrés Pruna. Here to tell you a little bit about him is the Aquarium's president, Jerry Schubel. Para hablar sobre Andrés Pruna es el Dr. Schubel. Let's give him a round of applause. Fuerte aplausos.
Thank you, Marilyn. Welcome, everybody who is here in the theater and also those who are watching remotely. For those of you here, please turn your cell phones off or put them on vibrate and try to refrain from texting throughout the program. I want to thank our sponsors that make this lecture series possible, Gazette newspapers and the Courtyard Marriott. As Marilyn said, it's a wonderful treat and honor to welcome this evening Andrés Pruna. He's going to share stories of his experiences, some of his photographs and film clips of his travels, mainly in Patagonia, but really around the world, and discuss his artwork, which documents wildlife and nature. Pruna is a Cuban American artist. He's a former National Geographic photographer, an independent filmmaker, and he's combined his love of nature, his training as a painter and illustrator, and his skills in both photography and diving into a lifelong adventure in the pursuit of art that documents nature. As he's explored marine environments around the world, he has observed wildlife, including penguins, other seabirds, marine mammals, such as orcas and elephant seals, and environmental changes over the years. There's an exhibit of some of his work upstairs, and following his talk, we're going to have a reception upstairs, and I hope you will all join us. This is a remarkable individual. Born in Cuba, came to the United States about the age of 10, I think. He studied in Massachusetts, then went back to Cuba and finished high school. And everything changed for him in 1961 when his father and his brother were put in prison. And he was part of the Bay of Pigs invasion. He was one of the lucky ones that escaped. He's been involved with diving, with Sea Lab, with Tektite, just a remarkable, remarkable career. And he's won all kinds of awards for his photographs and for his filmmaking, and we're honored to have him with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Andrés Pruna.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Okay. First of all, I want to thank the Aquarium of the Pacific for inviting me to give this lecture. It's really a privilege to be here. First of all, I want to warn you that when you see me in the screen, I have lost almost all my hair. And so you'll see a different person up there most of the time. Really, what I want to talk about is a little bit about my journey as a both photographer and a painter in pursuit of art, really, and how to merge the two, the art and nature. Let me start by showing you some of the clips that we have started. Okay, the reason I'm showing a city at the beginning of this talk is because obviously the difference between nature and what is not nature is basically everything that is man-made is not nature, and everything that is not man-made or hasn't been in any way altered by man is nature. And, you know, we lose sight of that a lot in our, let's say, daily existence, because we have been accustomed to being around things that are man-made so long that we no longer have an idea of what really nature is like. And, you know, nature is a magnificent thing that we seldom really dwell unless we go into the ocean or we go into pristine areas, which every year there are less and less. If you don't mind, I will read a couple of passages that I've written in regards to this lecture because it best explains some of the things that I want to convey in this talk. By logic, then, the human population increases and man-made objects also increase, resulting in less space for the natural things. And consequently, we're living in a planet where the natural world is either dying or shrinking. And this worries me because I don't see an end to it. I really don't. In the meantime, the artificial world or the man-made world is growing, and the human population is also growing exponentially. And I don't see an end to that either. You know, Einstein once said, if you look deep into nature, you will understand everything better. And on and off for a little bit over 70 years, that's what I've been doing. I was very lucky to be born in an island where it never gets too hot or too cold, where the waters are crystal clear, where the surrounding oceans are full of fish, where there are no poisonous animals, and where really everything, fruits and whatever, grow at plenty. It's like a paradise. Having said that, there's an old Cuban joke that I must tell you about, and it goes a little bit like this. They say God and St. Peter got together to create the world, and God tells St. Peter, I'm going to create this island in this beautiful ocean that is warm and transparent and where fruits grow everywhere. And there's not going to be any poisonous animals. There's going to be plenty of food for everybody. And it's never going to get really cold, and it's never going to get really warm. And St. Peter says, God, you know, don't you think the other parts of the world are going to get jealous? And he said, wait a second, I haven't put the Cubans in there yet. So, unfortunately, that is true. It's a joke, but unfortunately, it's a very true joke. This map of Cuba that you see was made by my great-grandfather in 1901. And it's owned by Berkeley. I don't know how it ever got there, but it was a surprise to me because I knew my great-grandfather to be an intellectual, but I didn't know he was a map maker as well. And I've checked it out, and it's pretty accurate considering, you know, the equipment that he had in order to do it at that time. Here are some scenes of Cuba, so you can tell that it's really a magnificent place, and a place that in my youth became really what interested me in exploring and in nature. I was very lucky because I came from a family that was pretty well-to-do and an upper middle-class family, and it allowed me a lot of freedom. My parents were very permissive, letting me go. There I am at the young age, the explorer. And in those days, it's hard to explain just how Cuba was. There were no telephones. There was no electricity in the areas that we had to farm. And we used to really either go on horseback or on foot to all these really unique places. And it wasn't really dangerous in the sense that, you know, whenever we went to somebody's farm, the guajiros, as the Cuban people that live in the farmlands are called, were always very welcoming. They would always treat you with either coffee or water. So it was a wonderful place to grow up in and to explore. This is one of my paintings of the Cuban countryside, which I made years later. And here we have a typical Guajiro with his horse with a storm coming. and that's me again. What we carried was just simply a machete and maybe a burlap bag to carry something if we found it that might be of interest, which usually was frogs, snakes, all sorts of critters, much to the distress of the help in the house and whatever guests happened to be there that day. Anyways, I'll go on. This is another painting of Guajiro with his horse, typical situation found in Cuba. Moving through the several farms was no big deal because everybody kind of knew each other. And here are my parents in the farm, as a matter of fact. They've both passed away, but they were really instrumental in my youth, particularly because they let me go everywhere. The one thing that they asked me was to go with a younger or a young man that was actually a couple of years older than me, but he was a farmhand and he knew the area well and would accompany me in these trips. His name was Pepito, and here is my version of Pepito years later, a painting. And here is the nearby town, Nazareno, in which we used to go all the time. This is a typical sugarcane oxen-driven cart. Again, something very typical in Cuba. Even now, actually, they use them. Here we have some humpback whales that later I had the opportunity to see and dive with in the Hawaiian Islands. These photographs were sent to me by a good friend of mine, son, Flip Nicklin, who's now one of the top National Geographic photographers. And he was so kind to send me these, as when I went there, I was actually filming, so I didn't take any pictures. But you know, the excitement of exploring is something unique, whether it be filming whales or, you know, going into the desert where it's really, there's nothing, but believe it or not, there's all kinds of wonderful little things to see. It's all part of, you know, the natural world that we live in. Here we have, let me go back here. First, this is an underwater scene in Cuba in the Jardines de la Reina, which are reefs south of Cuba, which are probably the most pristine reefs left in the Caribbean today. Cuba, as you well know, has been sort of a place that has been left alone for many years because of the revolution and the fact that you know, you don't have relations with Cuba. So tourism has been there for a while, but it's really not been very often that they've gone into diving. Now they've begun to, but as a consequence, the place is really well protected, and as a result, it's one of the few places where you can still dive into what would have been a similar sort of dive, let's say in the Bahamas or in the Florida Keys maybe 30, 40 years ago. Here's a painting, again, of an Nassau grouper, one of the inhabitants of all of these areas. The exploration in Cuba, you know, whether it be a cave or some of the anoles, Cuba has probably more anoles than any other place on Earth, more different varieties. And here we have a chameleon, which is a very typical anole in Cuba, which, by the way, they're now also in Florida. And here we have the hutia, which is a mammal, which probably was one of the few animals or few mammals that are left in the islands. There used to be very many varieties of hutias in the different islands in the Caribbean, but now most of them are extinct, whereas in Cuba it still exists. And here we have the famous Cuban crocodile, which I might correct myself, this is a predator. So, but fortunately is located in areas that are hard to get to, and I certainly never came upon one, certainly not one this big. When I first became interested in the oceans was not until I went to school in the States. I went to school when I was about 10 years old, and to Eaglebrook School in Deerfield, Massachusetts. So I was really way away from the oceans. Here I am, 10 years old, with my dad going to school, to Eaglebrook, a prep school, a very fine school. But most of all, it was my discovery of books, and through the silent world with Jacques Cousteau and Eugenie Clark, the lady, the shark lady, and most of all with Hans Haas, the German, who was really a pioneer in diving, particularly in diving photography. And when I read all these books in school, I couldn't get back. I couldn't wait to get back to Cuba to go diving. Suddenly, my interest in diving was born. My interest then went to spearfishing. I guess it's a natural progression in diving. But in spearfishing, it also required free diving. And as a free diver, my experience really became, how should I say it? Most of all, here we have a clip of what freediving is about. And this, of course, are professional freedivers. But I wanted to point this out because while I was spearfishing, I developed what is called a mask squeeze. And the mask squeeze is something that you get from diving, free diving deep, but mostly in the old days when they had masks that were very, very large, like this. The one on the left is an old-fashioned mask. And what happens is that you can't equalize the air inside the mask, and then it tends to suck your eye out. And what it does is it breaks some of your little veins in your eye, and you end up with a bloody eye. And I remember I went to the doctor, and when I went to the doctor, he asked, they didn't know what it was. And so I told him, I'd been diving, and they said, oh, you got a mask squeeze. And they had never seen one at the time. So they brought all the doctors from the area to where I was to see this phenomena. He asked me, he said, how deep do you go? And I said, well, in order to get the big fish, you have to go pretty deep. He said, you have to go to the second drop-off. And he said, well, how deep is that? And I said, it's about 150 feet. And they kind of looked at me dumbfounded, and they said, what? So it's true, So I used to dive regularly, meaning one dive after the other to 150, 120. So here you have a Polynesian diver. These guys go down 30, 35 meters, and they stay down 3 or 4 minutes. But they were way ahead of the game even then, a long time ago, because they wear goggles, so they don't need to equalize them. But anyways, I went back to in Eaglebrook, also awakened my interest in painting. I had a really terrific art teacher at the time by the name of Bernie Felch. And Bernie was really the one that sort of discovered my talent in painting. And he got me into some competitions in the Boston Globe and whatever, and I won a couple of them. And suddenly, I realized that perhaps I should pursue art more seriously. So then I went back to Cuba to finish high school in Cuba, and at the same time attend the Escuela Nacional de Bellas Artes de San Alejandro. And the San Alejandro School of Art in Cuba is very famous, it still is, and some of the best painters in Cuba have graduated from San Alejandro. At the time, I also had, I wanted to extend my education in art. So I applied to a couple of schools, one in Spain, the Real Academia de Bellas Artes in San Fernando in Madrid, and also the Academy of Fine Arts in Pietro Venucci in Perugia, Italy. And I was accepted to both with a scholarship, but I had to get another scholarship from the Cuban government to pay for my tuition, or not tuition, I'm sorry, the room and board. But so I was all set to go, and it's a question of picking out which of the two countries I was going to go to. And I was all set to go, and then so I applied a visa to both places, and I thought I was going, but unfortunately for me and 7 million other Cubans, that's the population of Cuba at the time, we had a problem. We had a revolution. And that revolution sort of destroyed, well, my world went upside down. And I ended up in New York City, New Year's Day, or a couple of days after New Year's Day in 1959. And I had $100 in my pocket, a suitcase full of clothes, and the clothes on my back, because that's all we were allowed to leave with. And the only reason I was able to leave is because I had the visas to go to Italy and Spain. So I came through New York, and that's where I stayed. And like I said, my life changed completely. A month later, my dad was imprisoned for counter-revolutionary activities, and I didn't see my parents for 3 years. My brother was in prison and stayed in prison as a political prisoner. He went up in the hills, and he got caught, and they were going to put him in the firing squad. They actually did fire him. They fired blanks to make him talk because they thought he was a CIA agent. To make a long story short, he spent 20 years as a political prisoner. And so I didn't see him for 20 years. So this is how the second chapter of my life started. It was rough. So I'll go just a few years ahead because I have a little note here. I say, I know you're probably interested in my expanding my talk about what exactly I did in both the invasion of Cuba and my years in black operations in the CIA, or even my years in the Navy and UDT, SEAL teams. But this is really another lecture. So, let's move on with what I'm here to talk about, which is nature and the pursuit of art. And nonetheless, I have to talk a little bit about this. Basically, my pursuit at that particular moment was the boy becoming a man. Like I said before, I was recruited into going to the Bay of Pigs, and I ended up in underwater demolition teams. But after I got out, I received a commission, a presidential commission by the then President Kennedy. Here's a painting of mine, basically political prisoners and the firing squad, something that was terrible, but that happened in those years. And I ended up in New York painting. This is a model that I had for a couple of years, and as you can see, pretty young. And here I am in underwater demolition teams. This is the team that invaded Cuba. We were the first on the beach. And this is the brigade. It was an invasion of 1,200 men, which unfortunately ended up in a disastrous situation. Most of them were captured, some were killed, and a few of us got out alive to live another day, or to fight another day, I might say. Here I am with President Kennedy, who gave me shortly thereafter a presidential commission, and I went into the U.S. Navy as a ensign, and I would stay there training attached to UDT 21 and then SEAL Team 2, but short-lived because, believe it or not, I wasn't an American citizen at the time, so they really didn't know what to do with me. But 5 years would have transpired, and I was able to resume my interest in nature after that. But now I was better equipped. I had gone to diving school, and I was also chosen by the U.S. Naval Oceanographic Office to participate in the Sea Lab 3 program. So in order to get into Sea Lab 3, I had to go through underwater swimmer school, mixed gas. I had to go through first class diving school, and there was 40 of us that were trained as aquanauts. Here I am in a dive suit, the old-fashioned dive suit, and here we are with Sea Lab 3. But the idea was that we were going to live at 600 feet off the coast of California, off San Clemente Island, for 2 weeks at a time. Actually, I have a friend of mine from Sea Lab 3. How long were we supposed to live there, Lugo? 15 days, 5 teams at 600 feet. And Lugo came down here from Fresno, and I must mention him because Lugo in 1968 broke the world record in diving. He went down to 1,025 feet, which is an incredible feat, and it hasn't been surpassed since. So, very good. But anyways, we unfortunately we had an accident in Sea Lab where one of our aquanauts passed away, and the program was discontinued. Though and I might add, because I think it's important, that some of the fruits of our labor, or saturation diving, were later used by an elite team, which I'd rather not get into because it was top secret. But they ended up going in north of, actually in the Arctic, north of Norway, and diving out of a submarine in very deep water, tied into the cables that had all the communications for the Russians. So they were able to basically steal all the secrets that the Russians were communicating with. And this was as a result of our experiments and the ability to live for long periods of time in very deep water. So now I was an expert diver, and so I went back to filming and photographing and painting. But this time, I was better equipped, and I had picked as my instruments of choice the camera and the brush and a pad, a sketching pad. I went to then work for the Naval Oceanographic Office. Here is their logo. In the Office of Marine Sciences and Oceanographic Surveys Department. One of the heads of that particular department, a very good friend of mine who passed away, Frank Busby, a PhD in oceanography, knew of my painting ability, and we were actually renting or leasing a lot of deep water submersibles for surveying in really deep water. And he had the idea that maybe if I could get in one of these subs and sketch what I saw out of the porthole, I could then come back to the surface and do a conceptual sketch of everything I had seen. And as a result, we had the results that you see here, which is a composite of all the things that I saw through the submersibles all the way to shore. And another oceanographer friend of mine, also who was a professor at the George Washington University, Joseph Polio, said, we got to call this thing something. So we'll call them hypsographic drawings. And what it means is measuring and mapping the Earth's surface through drawings. And we used it many times, including the setting up of tektite in the Virgin Islands. Here's a rendering of a little the Perry submarine, which I'm using, or in this case, to look at the drop-off off Andros Island. Here we have another Perry submarine, and in the back you see a wet sub and a habitat. This is a hydrolab that was set up in the Bahamas. Here's another hypsographic drawing, and you can see now that you have both a profile and a head-on, and it gives you a very good idea of what the bottom looks like. And these drawings, hypsographic drawings, would be used many times again to survey, because no matter how clear the water, when you take photographs, you can only get a certain, small portion of the bottom. And, it's very difficult to do a complete map of the bottom just using photographs, though you can do it, but it's very, very difficult. So this, in a way, is another way of doing it. And it turns out that the renderings of the underwater terrain are quite accurate. Shortly thereafter, I met another individual who became one of my mentors, Bates Littlehales from National Geographic. And he and I became close friends, and he's the one that really introduced me to National Geographic. At that time, Bates was probably the #1 photographer for National Geographic, particularly in underwater photography. And in 1971, I was freelancing as a photographer and cinematographer, and was often called on assignment by National Geographic, Canadian Film Board, British Broadcasting Company, even Miles Perkins. I did a couple of shows with him. Usually, when they needed an experienced diver that they couldn't find somebody else to do the kind of work that they were looking for. So I remember one time, for example, complaining to Robert Gilka, who was then the head of the National Geographic photographic department. And I said, why do I always have to go to the Arctic or the Antarctic or these places that are freezing, and or you can hardly see your hand in front of your face? You always send a guy like David Duboulet, which to these wonderful other places. And he sat back on his chair and he said, hey, we have plenty of good photographers for the easy stuff, but we only have one for the difficult stuff. I'm sure that he meant it as a compliment, but I wasn't really very, I wanted to go to Tahiti or the Red Sea or some of these wonderful places. Well, my complaining must have paid off, because in 1971, I got an assignment to go to the Bahama Islands to film an assignment to film the Perry Link submarine, and that was being rented by the now infamous John DuPont. I don't know if you've heard of John DuPont, but at the time, John, he's from the heir to the DuPont family, and he owned the largest collection of seashells in the world. Not the largest, sorry, the second largest. This first is owned by, and still is, the largest, is owned by the Emperor of Japan. And the assignment, or the idea, was to go and find the Midas shell, which you're looking at it here. It's actually called a King Midas slit shell. And the reason that the shell is so valuable, if you want to call it, is that it mostly lives at about 3,000 or 4,000 feet of depth. And so consequently, it's very rare. And there was only a few in existence. And he knew where he could get it at probably around 1,000 feet. So we were headed to the Bahamas, to Fresh Creek, on the eastern side of, on the western side of Andros Island. in the tongue of the ocean. And as it turned out, I was an expert in that area. I had done a lot of work with the Naval Oceanographic Office there, with the AUTEC, the Atlantic Undersea Test and Evaluation Center. And we had placed all of the stations all around the tongue of the ocean. So this place is particularly interesting, meaning Fresh Creek, because about 100 yards from shore, the water drops from 125 feet to about 2,000 feet, straight down. So it's called a wall, and it really is a wall. So allegedly, these King Midas shells could be found there at not too great a depth. So we were headed there, and everything worked fine. But I knew that the assignment wouldn't be worth anything if we didn't find the shell. As it turned out, everything did work well, but we only found a couple of dead shells. And the idea was to find a living shell. Dead shells, there was a few, but living shells, there were none. And the idea, or what he wanted, was to find a live shell. So here we have DuPont inside the submersible. And this was an interesting anecdote. My mission was to photograph him and, of course, the dive and the shell. And I put here, the expedition went well. We had great weather and all the equipment worked as intended, but the Midas seashell proved as elusive as ever. We found some shells, but no live ones. And once more, my drawings helped out. I ended up making a drawing of the shell because nobody knew what the hell it looked like. And, you know, we didn't know what we were looking for, really, except for him. So I made a drawing of the shell, and then everybody got to look at it, and we all knew what he was after, more or less. Then one time he was, the sub was around 300 feet, and suddenly he found me taking pictures of him through the dome. And when we went back up to the surface, he said, you know, I could really use you to work for me with your talent. And he said, you know, I couldn't believe it when I saw you at 300 feet taking a picture of me. Are you crazy? And I said, well, yeah, it's kind of crazy. I said, but I'm used to making bounce dives, and I left some tanks at 10 feet and 20 feet in case I stayed too long. But in any event, I never took the job, and it's a good thing, because several years later, Mr. DuPont was convicted of murder. So I got away with murder. And here's a shot of the submarine on the wall going down. And it's really incredible waters off the Bahama Islands. No, here's the King Midas shell, alive, by the way. And that's what it looks like. But this was taken by somebody else many years later. We never got that shot. Had we gotten that shot, probably the article would have come out. But it didn't. Then in 1971, and I guess it's a good thing I didn't go with him, because shortly thereafter, in 1971, same year, I received a call from National Geographic asking me to go to Argentina, to Patagonia, to film whales. We were supposed to go to this area that you see pointed there in Patagonia, Argentina, and I'll show you in a minute what it looks like. I was to go down with two other National Geographic photographers. I was doing filming, they were doing photography. One of them was Chuck Nicklin, which I mentioned his son before, providing me with some pictures. And Chuck was well known to me. You know, I had dove with him many times before. And then Bill Curtsinger, another terrific photographer that had done some work in the Antarctic, including a couple of covers of National Geographic. So we went through a nightmarish experience with Argentine customs because we had a load of cameras and diving gear that you can't believe. And it's amazing that we even got through customs. But right after that, we went to, from Buenos Aires, here's Peninsular Valdes. As you can see, it looks almost like a hatchet. And the northern Gulf up there, the Gulf San Jose, see, it's almost enclosed. And the one below is Golfo Nuevo, and also it's kind of enclosed. And the peninsula, you know, it's not that big, but it's quite remarkable. It's got all sorts of animals living in it. And now it's become a World Heritage and also a national park. But in that particular year, it was practically unknown to everybody, except for the people that live in Puerto Madryn, in this little town here. So in any event, we went down there and lost a couple of windshields on our way because of all the rocks. Here's the kind of road that we're talking about, with a Zodiac boat on the roof. And we lost a couple of windshields. We lost ourselves in a couple of roads. And finally, we made it down there. It's over 1,000 miles from Buenos Aires to Patagonia. And, you know, when I was told I was going down there, it was really exciting because, you know, you hear about Patagonia, particularly in those days, and you're talking about places like, I don't know, Kamchatka or Tierra del Fuego or Kathmandu, you know, places you hear about, but you never think of really going there. Now, here, I don't know what this is. Here I am with you know, Zodiac, Jeep, outboard motors. It's pretty cool weather there. But in any event, what happened was that in 1969, a ship, a research ship belonging to the National Science Foundation, found that there was a bunch of whales right in front of, let me go back here, the Golfo Nuevo. And they were anchored over here, right at the front. And they were on their way, the name of the ship was a Hero. And they were, you know, going down to the Antarctic. And they anchored over here overnight. And suddenly they found themselves amongst whales, right whales, on top of that. So they made a report on it. And then in 1970, Dr. Roger Payne, a well-known scientist and cytologist, he decided to go down and explore and see if, make a reconnaissance trip to Peninsular Valdes, sponsored by the New York Zoological Society. And sure enough, he talked to the people there, and they told him that there were whales in the autumn and the winter, that a lot of whales were there. So he went down and set up a station there, a research station. He actually set it up right about there in the Gulf of San Jose. And I mean, the station was just a bunch of tents, and he had his family with him. And I think Dr. Payne has like 3 or 4 girls. So it was really a family affair. But anyways, he was being sponsored by both the New York Zoological Society and the National Geographic Society. So we were there to basically record his work. So when we arrived there, the big thing was to film. And let me go ahead here. And here I am. That's on that particular trip. This picture was taken from National Geographic. And there I am, you know, trying to stay away from this whale that seems to want to, you know, be close to where I am. So I didn't know what to expect. But here you will see me diving with the whales. The first time that we went, we didn't use tanks because we didn't know how the whales were going to react. And we wanted to get out of the water fast if things really got messy. But after a while, we ended up using tanks, and we experienced, you know, diving close to them. We found that the whales were very friendly. Most of the time, they didn't really care one way or the other whether we were in the water or not, because they were busy trying to mate. So, so we were the least interest. But on the other hand, we had to be careful because, you know, when you're diving with 7 or 8 of these whales, which are, the right whale is about anywhere between 50 and 60 feet long, and they weigh about 60 tons. The reason that they're called a right whale is because they were the best whale to kill during the whaling times. It's the right whale to kill. And that's because they provided the most amount of oil, as well as baleen, of any other whale. And as a consequence, they also became the rarest of all whales. There is a North American right whale as well, in the North Atlantic, but they're almost extinct. They're really in bad shape. The ones in the Southern Atlantic, thanks to all this experiments and basically the exposure, and here's where we come in, you say, well, why do we document these animals? Obviously, it's because it's interesting and everybody wants to see them and see what they're like. But the main purpose is that the Argentines themselves didn't know. I remember the first time I went to Argentina, I went to a garage, one of these hand pump things. And I said to the guy asked me, he said, what are you doing here? ¿Qué haces aquí? And I said, we're here to film the whales. Estamos para filmar las ballenas. And he said, what whales? And I said, oh, shit, maybe we're in the wrong place. So I said, the whales. And he said, oh, you mean the cachalotes? And I said, yeah, that's right. Of course, cachalote is the Spanish name for the sperm whale. So basically, they didn't really realize, whether the whales that were there were rare or really what they were. I'm sure some people did, but, for the most part, they just knew that they had a lot of whales there. And as it turns out, we found sperm whales there as well, and several dolphins, including the Riso dolphin, which is quite rare. But as you can see here, the whales are really spectacular. Now they're coming back. The population is coming back, but it's very, very slow going, and it's taken them a long time to come back. Anyways, this was also a life-changing story for me to go down there. And I ended up actually knowing these whales by their markings, by a particular white spot or a tail or maybe a scar on the tail. And the reason I got to know them so well is that I spent 10 years filming them. So at the end, I ended up being supposedly the person that perhaps spent more times with whales than anybody. And a rather unique and at the same time unsubstantiated claim. But the reason that this was a life-changing experience for me was that I ended up finding a girl whom I fell in love with, and I ended up marrying in Puerto Madryn. And there's a little bit of a funny anecdote there, because I remember, going to Patagonia in those days was like going to the end of the earth. Nowadays, it's not that hard. A lot of people go down there. As a matter of fact, I've met even, I think a day or two ago, some people that had gone there, which really surprised me. But in those days, nobody went there, and nobody knew there were any whales there, except for us. And the anecdote basically is that I came back and I said to my dad, I said, I met a girl down there, and I fell in love with her, and I think she's in love with me. I don't know why I can't, oh, here we go. And I told my dad, I said, it takes like 2 weeks for a letter to get down there. It takes hours to get through on the phone if you can get through, which usually you can't. And this is a really, really hard relationship, And he said, well, you got two choices. You either go down and marry her or forget her. So so I did the former. Anyways, I ended up going down and not only marrying her, but living down there for many, many years. If I can get this thing to move, let's see, okay. Here you have a fluke. Actually, the right whale has the most beautiful fluke, I think, of any of the whales. Maybe the blue whale can compete with it. Here you have a whale, I believe, looking at me. You know, it's funny because there are these little crab-like creatures that live on this whale in the in where you see, you know, the calluses that they have over the eye. They have the calluses over all the areas that ordinarily, here's a mating of whale, two whales mating, and here's a breaching. But anyways, these little critters live on the whale. And the funny thing is that if the whale were to disappear, so would this critter, because the only place they live is with the whale. So here you have a symbiotic type of relationship where, you know, if one species disappears, which it almost did, then the other species, which is maybe insignificant, but significant to the whale, would have also disappeared. So, you know, this is me and my wife then. You can see I've lost most of my hair. Then after that trip, Roger Payne came to me, and I must tell you an anecdote of that happened to me while I was there. I jumped in the water one day, and I found two whales swimming, you know, sort of together, and I didn't really know what was going on, but they were, you know, smack together, and they were swimming basically together. And then they separated, and of course I noticed that one of them was a male, and it threw out some, you know, like a cloud of stuff, which I didn't know what it was. It could have been blood or semen or a mixture of the two. And I then went back and I filmed it, and I went back and told Payne what I had just filmed and seen. And he said, "What?" He said, "My God, you know, you have probably seen the only copulation that anybody's ever seen underwater." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Did you film it?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Whoa," you know, he went like a little kid, crazy. And a couple of months later, he wrote me a letter and said, "You know, Andy, I went to the Explorers Club in New York and showed your film to a standing room only audience." So it was really fantastic. It was the first copulation of a whale underwater ever taken. So that was pretty significant. So anyways, after that trip, he asked me to do a series of lithographs of the right whales. And I, you know, didn't do it then. But later on, I went ahead and did a bunch of actually charcoal drawings, some of which are exhibited here in the aquarium. And here is the death of a whale, which unfortunately we did find some. And here is an albino, which I found. And believe it or not, this is a whale that I followed through life. I saw her when she was a baby, just born, and I saw her again when she grew up, and I saw her again when she became a mother herself. Here is a right whale breaching. And this particular collection, some of them were shown in the Audubon magazine, had a special issue in 1975. It was, as far as I know, the only issue that they've ever made on marine mammals. You know, a bird magazine showing whales. And here you have a fluke. And this, by the way, is owned by a lady collector in Florida. And I must admit, you know, some of these paintings are in private collections, so which I'm extremely grateful for, and primarily for allowing me to use them in this lecture. And now we come to one of the craziest characters in Patagonia, which is the Magellanic penguin. And I did 3 films on Magellanic penguins. And this is a fascinating bird because of its unique behavior, as they are unique in the avian world. And of course, there's many different types of penguins, but the ones off Patagonia are the ones that they have here in the aquarium, I believe. There's the one in South Africa, which looks very much like it, but it has a different stripe on the front. think it has only one stripe. But I can tell you, filming penguins is one of the most interesting things that you could possibly do. But I can easily enumerate the downside of filming in a penguin rookery. First of all, when it's cold and there's a stiff breeze, and it's not too bad. But when the sun is out in the summer and it's really hot and the wind is down, the smell is almost unbearable. Secondly, the common name of the penguin is the Jackass Penguin. I don't know if you heard it. Fortunately, I don't think they do much of a braying here in the aquarium. But when you got close to 1 million penguins around you, and they're all braying, let me tell you, you can go insane because it's day and night. And I'll show you. Here they are, by the way, after a fight. They're, strong. And they live in this area. Another thing, they have a habit of stealing things, which we quickly found out. They'll come and every morning we'd have to get up and look for camera parts, eating utensils, anything. Remember one time one got in my tent and grabbed a broom. I mean, they're really strong. And he was trying to get out of the tent with a broom in his mouth. And he couldn't get out because, the broom was sideways like that. And, man, he was trying and trying. Finally, he gave up and dropped the broom and got out. But they're really, after a while, if you sit there, they think you're a penguin too. And they'll just come in your tent and, and try to dig a hole there. And it's really an amazing little animal. They also have extremely, the first time I went down there, I saw a penguin, and I had never seen a penguin. So what I did is I went to it, and they don't go away like a normal bird. Here's a painting of the two Magellanic penguins, typical pose. You can hardly tell them apart, a female and a male. And by the way, they pair for life. They stay together unless one of them dies, in which case, they probably look for another pair. But if not, they stay together for life. Here's what they sound like. If you can imagine trying to sleep with that, and there I am, much younger. But anyways, they burrow in the hard sand. They make these holes where here's an albino one, or partially albino, which is kind of a rarity, but not completely unusual. And in these barrels, they put, they're big enough for two, and then the young chicks, usually two, to a pair. They cross beaks. They go between the two beaks. That's one of their ways of recognition, or one of their mating. They might be recognizing each other. And of course, you're surrounded by gulls and especially skuas, which try to steal the eggs and the young chicks. See, there's one that trying to steal an egg. But they're very protective, and I was saying before, they're very strong. I try to get close to one, and they let you go real close, almost to pet them. But if you get too close, they'll bite you, and boy, they can bite, as my son can attest. He got bitten by one, and if it had been an inch higher, he would be a one-eyed producer now. But he was fortunate, and after that, you learn the lesson quickly. You treat him with respect. Here we are in an area called Punta Tombo. And Punta Tombo is a little peninsula that juts out also into the ocean, and you have about 1 million penguins there. And you also have terns that also nest there. You have gulls that nest there, and you have cormorants that nest there. So it's really an incredible paradise for birds and studying birds. That's one, here you are, two gulls fighting for an egg. One drops it, another one grabs it in midair. Now, we had an incredible experience while filming penguins, something really unique. It was a flood in the rookery. You know, this area is semi-arid and hard-packed sand. And we had a torrential rain that lasted for about 2 days and rained like 3 or 4 inches of rain in a very quick time, and everything flooded, and all the holes flooded, and of course the penguins drowned, the little ones, and the eggs were, ruined, and we had to get out of there. And the smell was just unbelievable. If the smell is usually bad, you can imagine with thousands of birds that are dead and rotting. But when we came back a couple of weeks later, things were back to normal. New chicks, new eggs, life went on. See, there's a skua killing a young chick. So, I mean, it's a tough world they live in. And they survive by numbers more than anything. But I'll turn that off. You don't want to watch this, I don't think. Here we have now another situation that we ran into. About a year later, I started a film. Oh, this film, by the way, that I started, the first one that I did in Peninsular Valdes after I did the Geographic, I did with a very good friend of mine, another diver, actually a guy that had been in Special Forces, but a unique individual, Cuban American. And the uniqueness of Cuban, aside from being a terrific diver and a very, very good friend, is the fact that his father is Yehudi Menuhin, probably the greatest violinist ever. And we did this film, took us about a year and a half filming, and we lived in tents, really rough going. And he and his wife, Annie, and my wife, then I was already married, Marisabel and myself, we spent a year and a half filming the whole year. We filmed the whales, the penguins, the sea lions, everything, except for the orcas. We hadn't filmed the orcas. And we came up with a film that was later released by the BBC. Krov took it back to England and ended up editing it. And we actually had an original music score by Yehudi Menuhin, which was really incredible. And we ended up releasing that film in the BBC, and it broke every record up to then as a wildlife documentary. It was considered the first whale film ever made, and it even beat the ratings for the Cousteau films that had already been shown there. So it was really a first in many, many ways. But about a year later, I did another film called Había una vez en el sur, which literally means once upon a time in the south. And that film was a feature film, meaning it was an hour and a half long, and it encompassed all of the Patagonian animals, including the foxes, the guanacos, land animals, even condors. And when the film came out, it was a revelation to the Argentines, which, for reasons that perhaps are very difficult to imagine, didn't really know their own South. And it became probably the most popular film at the time when it was released in Argentina. And as a result of that film, the area became a tourist area. So sometimes I kick myself thinking, here we had this pristine, beautiful place, and I don't know whether I discovered it or I ruined it, or both. So, unfortunately, it would have been discovered no matter what, sooner or later. But certainly this film helped a lot. Now you have cruise ships going in there on a weekly basis, and I'm not sure that that's a good thing. And Punta Tombo is now a government reserve. It used to be just an estancia that, like a sheep farm that nobody knew about. And now you get, hundreds of tourists there every day. So, everything changes. And like I said before at the beginning, overpopulation is something that, it's happening everywhere. And it's changing everything. Before, Patagonia was the end of the world. Now you can get there very easily, and you can phone, and you can actually use a cell phone to call down there. Times change. So now we go into something that is really unique. And this is part of this film, Había una vez en el sur. And it's an attack by killer whales that had never been filmed before. And the uniqueness is that the killer whales are attacking a sea lion colony. I mean, of course, there was a lot of talk of this happening, but nobody had ever filmed it until this film was made. So I received a telegram after we released this film from Jacques Cousteau, who wanted to buy some of the footage for one of his films. And he complimented me in saying that this was the most impressive film he had ever seen of orcas. So that was, it was amazing. Here I was, when I was 11 years old, reading The Silent World and envisioning Cousteau as one of my heroes in life. And now he was asking me for footage for his TV program and telling me that this was the most fantastic footage he had ever seen. So, to me, it was a special compliment. And it shows you how the world goes around. It's pretty impressive. And it's really, if you are there and see this, it's, you don't know whether to cry or to, it's really nothing you can do. But orcas, if you ever see the skeleton of an orca or the mouth of an orca, they're not like a shark. Their teeth are not cutting teeth. They're round. They're round teeth. And these teeth are incapable of cutting. So what the orca does is it throws the seal in the air. It actually flips it in the air, both with its mouth and with its tail, and they basically bang it around to the point that they rip it to pieces. And that's then they eat whatever they can, the pieces that they can eat. Otherwise they would choke, much like a person would choke on bones. So what they basically do is tear it to pieces and then eat it. So the sea lions try to get away, but in mostly there's one, a lot of times they get away, but these are probably one of the most intelligent animals I have ever seen, talking about the orca. And what they can do is really remarkable. I have been in the water with orcas, but unfortunately most of the time when I get in the water with an orca, the orca goes away. And I don't know whether it's unfortunate or fortunate, actually. I guess you could look at it in both ways. I'll let this run because it's really unique. This was filmed in 1975, and then the film went on to win an award in Canada as the best documentary, and it also was nominated for a gold leaf. And there you have it, when it throws the seal in the air. You can see it, it really, literally tears it to pieces. And this is a part of a pod of orcas that lives around the peninsula. And they just keep coming, and they actually live there now. But the problem is that this happens very few times of the year. So you got to be really lucky to run into this. And that time, we were actually packing all our equipment and leaving the area when I saw this fin over the berm of the shoreline. And when I saw that, I said, oh, wow, this is an orca. Let me see what's going on. And then I saw this orca beaching itself, trying to catch a sea lion. So we took all the gear out again, and we filmed the rest of the day because we figured, we're never going to catch this again. And anyways, that's basically one of the first also, as it turned out. Here you have some shots of humpback whales, in this case in Hawaii, where the water is beautifully clear. And it's a totally different kind of whale. Behaves different, they swim differently, but they're really wonderful whales to work with too. And here I'm going to show you a bunch of different pictures that I've taken in different parts of the world, as well as paintings that I've done of some of these areas. This is in the Arctic, in the Lamaine Channel, in the Antarctic, I'm sorry. Here is the Antarctic again. You can see the icebergs are different from the ones in the Arctic. These are usually flat top. Here you have some sea lions, and these are not sea lions, these are seals in the Antarctic. And here you have a colony of penguins on an iceberg. You can see, it's really, but these are different kind of penguins. These are gentoos here, and in the Antarctic. And here you can see the size of these icebergs. It's really like a cliff. Here you have a Amazon dolphin. Here, one of my drawings of a jaguar. And here you have a kestrel type of hawk. This is also a drawing. Here you have a Cuban family. Here you have a golden eagle over the Grand Canyon. This is a very large drawing, by the way. And this is even larger. This is a brown pelican sitting over a log that says no fishing, but of course they don't know. How can you tell a pelican not to fish? And here you have a young girl in Cuba. And this is a scene of the jungle. I always try to imply the jungle, you know, I have voices. Jungle, when you go in by yourself in the jungle, I mean in a really deep jungle, like maybe in the Amazon, you always think you hear things, and you don't know whether it's animals or parrots or what they are, but it's scary. It's really weird. Here's some sand dunes in Patagonia in this case. An owl, and here you have a burrowing owl with the groin. This is a sea lion, southern sea lion. Here's another kind, a chinstrap penguin, another kind of penguin. Pretty much the same size as the ones that are here, but a completely different type of penguin. This is in the Arctic, in the midnight sun. And this is taken in Pingnartung, which is a town in Baffin Island, up in the Arctic, where we were looking for whales also, belugas in this case. And here's two gray fox in Patagonia. These are some of the land animals that you find in Peninsular Valdes. Here's a further north in Iguazu Falls, one of the most fantastic falls in the world. And the reason we went there is to look for a little bird, and there it is. It's a type of swift that stays in the air most of his life. But this little guy actually flies through the falls. And behind the falls, there's a space of about 2 feet, and he nests there. So they're incredible. I don't know how they do it. I mean, they come right through the fall and land 2 feet inside the fall to nest. And the rest of the time, they're up in the air. So they basically live their lives in the air, other than the time that they nest. So in order to film them, I had to go climb the falls and go behind. So let me tell you, it's pretty hairy. But some of the things you do to try to get a picture, here, of course, the white shark. And this is a type of boat that is no longer almost in existence in the Bahamas, where they used mostly for conch fishing. But they used to be all over the Bahamas, and they're built in the Bahamas. This is a Yanomami, which are now, their name has changed, but it's a tribe in the Orinoco River in Venezuela and Brazil. And It's a beautiful, beautiful place. This is a Cuban parrot. Okay, we'll wrap it up. Here's elephant seals. Elephant seals. Okay, well, basically, what I have now is just a bunch of different photographs. And here we have a feeding frenzy, which is probably the most impressive thing that I've ever seen. And I'll part with that. You know, somebody asked me the other day what was the most impressive thing that I have ever seen. And I told them, I think it was somebody from Univision, and you know, they couldn't understand what I was talking about, perhaps because it was all done very quickly. But one day the sun was going down and we couldn't film anymore. And in Patagonia, the sunsets are absolutely incredible. The whole sky turns red, and it has to do with the desert and the winds coming from the mountains. But the whole sky was red, and we couldn't film anymore, and I jumped in a Zodiac by myself, which is unusual, and I went to this flock of birds that was about 2 miles away, and when I got there, I found that there were maybe 2,000 or 3,000 birds feeding. There was a feeding frenzy, and there was all kinds of birds, albatross, skuas, seagulls, penguins, everything was diving in and out, and the noise was just, if you can imagine, 2,000 birds making sounds. And they were all jumping and diving into this tremendous orb of anchovies. And in the middle of all this was like maybe 300 or 400 dolphins, all jumping and doing somersaults and twisting and, you know, trying to corral all of these little fish. And then when I thought, you know, I couldn't find anything else, about a dozen whales came in and started feeding as well. And, you know, with the sky red, the ocean almost black, and all this going on, it was about as close to a religious experience as I've ever had. It was really nature in the rawest. And all I can tell you is that, you know, if you want to pursue the life of seeking nature, whether it's to photograph or just enjoy it, or in my case, painting, it's a wonderful journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Remarkable storyteller and a great artist, not only in painting and sketching and drawing, but photography and cinematography. Since we're going to have a reception upstairs where some of Andy's art is exhibited, I'm going to let us do the Q&A upstairs so you can have some refreshments and you can talk to Andy upstairs. If you're interested in climate engineering, geoengineering, we have a lecture tomorrow night at 7. You will hear Holly Buck, who's a scientist at UCLA, who has a remarkable new book that's in press about geoengineering. And if you really think that we're going to keep the climate to within 2 degrees or anything close to 2 degrees Celsius of what it was pre-industrial, which was the goal from the Paris conference, the only way that will happen is if we can remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it away safely, and there's a growing recognition of that. Please join me again in thanking Andy for a great, great talk.
Thank you very much.